This is Ichiro Takeuchi, team leader of data-driven biomedical science team. And thank you very much for joining us. And before starting our seminar, let me briefly talk about the instructions of this seminar. The first, reproduction is prohibited, and this is everything is recorded. So please understand that. And also for the Q&A question, you can use the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen during the presentation. And I will try to answer as much as possible during the each of the researchers' talk. Okay, so now let me start. So this seminar is by data-driven biomedical science team, and I'm team leader Ichiro Takeuchi. Today we have 5 talks. I will start from a very brief introduction of our team, which is about 10 minutes. And then we have the following 4 talks, each with around 25 minutes, provided by the members of our team. Okay, so now let me start my introduction. For scientific study, there are 4 types of approach. The first approach is based on experiment, and the second approach is based on theory, and the third approach is based on simulation, for example, by using Fugaku. And the fourth approach is based on data. And this fourth approach is often called data-driven science. And our team is interested in this data-driven science. So we have 2 missions in our team. The first mission is to develop AI and machine learning methods for data-driven science in general. And the second mission is to apply those methods to biomedical and material science projects. Actually, we have a lot of collaboration with biomedical scientists and material scientists, but today we focus on our first mission, AI and ML methods for data-driven science in general. So what is data-driven science? Perhaps there are several opinions, there are several viewpoints about what is data-driven science, but our interpretation is as follows. So this is a very, very brief process of scientific discovery. We have a research target, and some hypothesis is built on the research target. Then that hypothesis is evaluated somehow. If the evaluation result is consistent with the hypothesis, then we have scientific discovery. Maybe this is too simple, but this is just a very simple description of the scientific study process. Before talking about the data-driven science, let me think about the traditional, let's say, knowledge-driven science. In traditional knowledge-driven science, human expert will provide a hypothesis based on his or her knowledge, experience, etc. In order to evaluate the hypothesis, the researchers will conduct experiments and get the experimental data. If the experimental results are consistent with the hypothesis, then they can get scientific discovery. On the other hand, in data-driven science, everything is done by data. We have a huge collection of data about our research target, and using the data, by applying the data to some machine learning or AI algorithm, we build hypotheses. Then that hypothesis is evaluated, again, based on data. So everything will be done by data. So this is how data-driven science goes. And actually, there are several issues to be studied for data-driven science. And we have 3 target problems. The first target problem is how to build data-driven hypothesis. And the second target task is how to guarantee the reliability and reproducibility in data-driven science. And the third approach is how we can make the experiment efficient by data-driven approach. For each of these 3 target tasks, we are working on some we are working on each of these three problems. For the first problem, data-driven hypothesis building, we are working on sparse modeling for structured data. So for structured data, like sets, graphs, and sequence, we would like to extract some important information as a hypothesis for that is good for prediction or classification, for example. And for the second task, reliability, reproducibility in data-driven science, we are working on selective inference, which is also known as post-selection inference. For the third, data-driven experimental data design approach, we are particularly interested in active learning under uncertain environment. So let me briefly, very briefly talk about these three topics. The detail will be provided later by each presentation by the researchers in our team. So we are interested in analyzing complex data, for example, structured data like sets, graphs, sequence, etc. And we'd like to extract some important components from those structured data and develop some model, for example, for classification or regression, as represented by this picture. So this problem looks easy, but remember that the components of the structured data has very huge. We have exponentially large number of components in the structured data. So we have to somehow think about overcome the computational difficulty in order to extract the optimal hypothesis, optimal subcomponents from the structured data. There are various approaches to this problem, but we are our main tool is safe screening. Actually, we have been studying safe screening for a long time, and we have published a number of papers on safe screening and its extensions. For this topic, we have two talks today. Talk 4 will be provided by Jai Eugene. He will talk about screening rules and its complexity for active set identification. If you want to know what is safe screening, please join this talk 4. And Dr. Hiroyuki Hanada will talk about the predictive pattern mining, supervised learning for set, sequence, or the like. So he will extend the safe screening in order to handle structured data like set, sequence, and graphs. So this is for second topic about the reliability and the reproducibility of data-driven science. And we are working on selective inference, also known as post-selection inference. So selective inference is, in one word, a method for evaluating data-driven hypotheses. So this is a picture I showed before, and selective inference is for this red part. So selective inference is for evaluating hypotheses driven by data. Actually, traditional statistics does not work for data-driven hypothesis evaluation. And there are lots of issues we have to work on. And selective inference has been a very promising approach for evaluating data-driven hypothesis recently. We are working on a lot of problems using the framework of selective inference. And this is one example. Detail will be provided by the second talk by Mr. Bo. And this is a brain image. This left part is a brain image without tumor, and these right images with a tumor. And we would like to provide some reliability to the attention obtained by the convolutional neural network. And we can provide a kind of p-value, statistical significance for our attention. So this is a very important topics recently. Explanation and provide reliability to the machine learning result. And for the selective inference, we are hardly working on selective inference recently, and we have several publications on selective inference or other type of statistical inference for machine learning results. And today, right after this, my very brief introduction, Bo Nguyen Lee Yui will talk about statistically quantifying the reliability of data-driven science by selective inference. The third topic is about data-driven experimental design. And here, we are working on a standard setup of Bayesian optimization. Perhaps most of you are familiar with this kind of plots, Gaussian process updates for Bayesian optimization. And our main target is active learning under uncertainty. Here, F would be the black box function we would like to maximize. And this black box function has two types of variables, X and W. X are controllable design parameter. We can choose X. But W would be uncontrollable environmental parameter that follows some probability distribution, PW. We cannot control W. We can control X. So in this case, this fxw is, even if we specify X, fxw would be the random variable. So we have to work on somehow this uncertainty. And actually, we encounter a lot of practical problems where not only the controllable variable, but also some uncontrollable variable exist in a lot of science problem and also engineering problem. So we are working on this kind of problem. And we have, our team also have several publications in this active learning under uncertainty. And today, in the third talk, Dr. Yu Inatsu will talk about Bayesian experimental design for optimizing black box function under uncertainty. Okay, so this is my very, very brief introduction to each of the next talk. So before moving to each talk, please remember that your Q&A, your question can be posted to the Q&A tab right below the screen. Okay, so I hope you can enjoy our seminar. All right, so Yu-kun, could you start your seminar talk?
Yeah, yes, thanks.
Okay.
So I will share my screen.
Yeah, and I will turn off the video. So others except Yu-kun can turn off the video.
Okay. So you can see my screen now, right?
Yes, everything looks fine.
Okay, so let's start. So hi everyone. So my name is Yui, and in this presentation, I would like to introduce my research about statistically quantifying the reliability of data-driven science by selective inference. So in the first half of this presentation, I will introduce data-driven, why reliability is important, and why selective inference fits to our goal of quantifying the reliability. And then in the later half, I will introduce some of my research results on this direction. So now let's start. So this is the picture of 4 scientific paradigms. So originally we have the empirical science, and then there was theoretical science. But after that, for many problems, the theoretical model becomes too complicated, and it is difficult to solve the problem analytically. So that's why people had to start simulating. But at this point, simulating generates a huge number of data, and it is difficult for the scientists to solve the problem or get any discovery result from just by looking at a huge number of data. So that's what brings us to the fourth paradigm, data-driven science. So data-driven science is a scientific research in which unprecedented knowledge are extracted from the data, such as machine learning, data mining, and the general procedure is that we have our target problem, and then we will collect the data. So after we have the data, we will input them to the data-driven algorithm to obtain some data-driven result. But at this point, so the question is that this also raised another critical problem about the reliability. So the question is that, are these data-driven results reliable? So to answer these questions, we have to define some hypothesis or data-driven hypothesis based on the discovery results, and then we have to test those hypotheses to confirm that whether the data-driven algorithm is reliable or not. So this is the example for the change point detection problem. So given an observed sequential bioinformatic data, so after we apply some changing point detection algorithm on this data, we can obtain some changing point position. For example, in this case, at position A, B, and C. But it seems that the changing point at position C is not actually a true changing point. So it indicates that the result from the changing point detection algorithm is not reliable. So therefore, we need an additional step to testing to confirm that whether this result is reliable or not. So to do so, we have to define the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis, and then we have to develop a appropriate statistical hypothesis testing framework for testing these hypotheses. And similarly, for the second example, by input a brain image to a deep neural network, we can detect a region of tumor. So the question is that whether the detected regions is actually a tumor object or not. So similarly, in the previous example, we have to define the null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis, and we have to test the hypothesis to guarantee the reliability. So currently, there are some methods for conducting the statistical test. The first one is data splitting, but this method has some drawbacks. For example, by splitting the data, we lose statistical power. And more importantly, the data splitting is not applicable for some tasks such as unsupervised learning or representation learning. The second one is the naive statistical test, for example, two-sample test. But unfortunately, this test is invalid in the sense that we cannot properly control the false detection rate because our hypothesis is random, not fixed and span, and the hypothesis is randomly generated from the data. So because the current method has several drawbacks, so developing a valid and general statistical framework is highly necessary. And this is the reason bring us to selective inference. So what is selective inference? So recently, selective inference has been recognized as a new promising approach to assess the statistical reliability of data-driven hypotheses. The basic idea of selective inference is that we have to make the inference conditional on the selection event, and then we can derive the exact sampling distribution of the test statistic. So therefore, we can conduct a valid test, and we can theoretically control the false finding probability. But the main challenge of selective inference, how can we characterize the conditional event? How can we identify the conditional data space? So this is the general schematic illustration of selective inference. So as step one, given an observed data X observed, by applying an algorithm on this data, we obtain the hypothesis A, which is in red color. And then at the second step, we have to identify the conditional data space such that when we apply the algorithm on any data point in this conditional data space, we obtain the same hypothesis as the observed data. In this picture, the orange region is the conditional data space that we want to identify. And when we apply the algorithm A on any data point on this orange region, we can obtain the same hypothesis A as the observed data X observed. And finally, at step 3, we can conduct the inference conditional on the conditional data space that we have already identified at the second step. And now, in summary, by doing this kind of conditional inference, we can properly control the false finding probability, and our test is valid. So that's it, and for the first part, and then from now on, I will introduce some of my research results on selective inference. So the first paper entitled Parametric Programming Approach for More Powerful and General Lasso Selective Inference. So this is the motivating example. So we want to examine the association between 10,000 genes and the drug response Y. So when we input the data, after we input the data into a feature selection algorithm, for example, lasso, we can select some genes which are highly associated with the response vector Y. So in this case, we select gene 5, gene 11, and gene 123. After that, we can define a linear model with the selected set of genes, and each gene has its own coefficient. For example, the coefficient of gene 5, beta hat 5 equal plus 3.1, which indicates that gene 5 has positive association. And from now, after we have the set of selected genes, we want to guarantee that, confirm that whether this gene actually associated with the response vector Y or not. And we want to test the reliability of this result. So in this case, for example, in gene 11, So the beta hat of E11 is equal plus 0.5. So this value is quite small, and it seems that gene 11 might actually have no association with the response vector y, even if selected by the feature selection algorithm. So we want to confirm the reliability of this one. So let's calligraphy A observe with a set of selected features by applying a feature selection algorithm on the observed data. So A observe is the set of selected coefficient whose selected feature whose coefficient is non-zero. Then we want to conduct a hypothesis testing for each feature J in this set. So we consider the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis. Under the null hypothesis, we assume that there is no association between the feature J and the response vector Y. And if the p-value is smaller than some given significance level alpha, for example, 0.05, we can reject the null hypothesis, and we can say that this feature J actually must have some association with the response vector. And from now we define the defined hypothesis. Now we need to define some test statistics. So based on the least square estimation, we can estimate the beta hat for each feature J in the selected set, and this estimation can be later used for defining the test statistic. And now we have already defined the hypothesis. We already have the test statistic. Now we can conduct the inference condition on the data space whose data have the same active set as the observed sequence. So now, but in this case, identifying this conditional data space is challenging. It's non-trivial. So in this paper, we propose a parametric program approach or homotopy method for efficiently characterizing this conditional data space. So this is the schematic illustration of the method. In the step 1, given the observed data Y observed, we apply lasso on this observed data to obtain the observed active set. So in this way, the active set includes feature 1, 3, and 5. And then at the second step, so by restricting the data on the line, we perform lasso on the parameterized data, and we identify the subspace whose data has the same active set as the observed data. So in this case, the red regions is the conditional data space that we want to identify. And when we apply lasso on any data point in this red region, we obtain the same active set as the observed data. So this one is the active set include feature 1, 3, and 5. So from now, after we can finally identify the conditional data space, we can conduct the test easily, compute the valid p-value, and we can successfully control a false positive probability. So this is the result. So in this one, TNA, which the proposed method, which is in blue color, we call it TNA because we only conditioning on the observed active sets. And the proposed method, and we show that the proposed method can successfully control the false positive rate on the left figure and has the highest power on the right figure compared to the other existing method. So that is the result for our first paper. So let's move on to the second one. So computing valid p-value for optimal change point by selecting and using dynamic programming. So in this one, we propose an exact non-asymptotic inference methods, which we call offset SI, also based on the concept of selective inference for quantify the reliability of the detected change point. So this picture shows an example. The gray circle and the blue lines indicate the observed sequence and the underlying mean respectively. The red dotted lines are the change point detection result obtained from change point detection algorithm. And you can see that at position A and E, there is a false detection. There is no actually true changing point at this position, so which indicate that the result obtained from the changing point detection is not reliable. And therefore, we propose this method to provide the p-value for each detected change point. And you can see that with the proposed method, the p-value at position A and E is very large, so which indicate that these are false detection. And for the other changing point at position B, C, D, and F, the p-value is small, so which indicate they are true detection. So this is a technical detail of the proposed method. We also consider the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis under the null hypothesis, we assume that there is no difference in the population mean between the left segment and the right segment. So if the p-value is more than some significant level alpha 0.05, so we reject the null hypothesis and the detected changing point decided to be significant. Otherwise, it's not. And then to compute the valid p-value, we have to consider the sampling distribution of the test statistic conditional on the data space whose data have the same detected changing point as the observed sequence. So in this case, also characterizing this conditional data space is challenging. And then in the lower part of this slide, this is the schematic illustration of the proposed method for efficiently characterizing the conditional data space. And in this paper, we propose a parametric dynamic programming approach for efficiently identify this region. So from now, we can identify the conditional data space. We can easily compute the p-value. So the experimental results offers the evidence that the proposed method, which is offset SI, which is in the red color, can probably control the false positive rate on the left figure, and also has the highest power on the right figure. And we also demonstrate that the proposed method provides good result in several applications, practical application, especially for the bioinformatic data. So this is the result for the second works. So let's move on to the final one, quantifying the statistical significance of neural network representation-driven hypothesis by selective inference. So in this work, we provide a method to quantify the statistical significance of the attention region obtained from a deep neural network in the forms of the p-value. So this is the example in the upper image. So when we input the image to the deep neural network, we can obtain some attention region. And actually, this region is not a tumor, but even this region is not a tumor region. If we use the naive p-value, the naive p-value is still very small. So which means that the naive p-value is not reliable. So if we provide our selective with the proposed selective p-value, which is very large, we can identify that these are false detection. And for the lower image, with the image, for the lower picture with the image containing some tumor region, and the naive p-value and the selective p-value is also small, which indicate they are actually a tumor region. So this is the technical of the proposed method. So we also consider the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis. So under the null hypothesis, we assume that there is no difference between the population mean there is no difference in the population between the object and the background. So if the p-value is smaller than alpha 0.05, so we can reject the null hypothesis and we decide that the detected region is the tumor region. So otherwise we cannot accept that. And to compute the valid p-value, we consider the sampling distribution of the test statistic conditional on the data space, on which when we apply the deep neural network for any data point on this data space, we obtain the same result of object and background as the observed data. So once again, identify this conditional data space is also challenging and difficult. And therefore, in the lower part of the slide, we propose a homotopy method to efficiently identify this conditional data space. So the general procedure is that at the first step, given an observed image, each observed, we apply a deep neural network on this data to obtain some observed representation. And then we focusing on the line and applying the deep neural network on the parametric data on this line. And we obtain the conditional data space, which is in red. And in this conditional data space, all the data points have the same representation as the observed image. And now, after identifying the conditional data space, we can easily calculating the selective p-value. So this is some experimental result from this work. In the first case, we apply the proposed method we consider the false positive case. So in this case, even there is no actually a tumor in the image, the p-value is small. So which means that the p-value is not reliable. But with the selective p-value, which is large, we can successfully identify that these are the false detection. And for the lower part, this is result for true positive case. And in this case, both naive p-value and selective p-value are small, so which indicate that there are tumor region in this image. So in summary, by using the proposed method with the selective p-value, we can successfully identify the false positive and the true positive. So in summary, selective inference is a new promising approach for quantifying the reliability of data-driven hypotheses. The fundamental challenge of the selective inference is to characterize the selection event to identify the conditional data space. And in this one, we propose a general parametric programming approach for efficiently identify this conditional data space. Finally, selective inference is useful for several problems, such as supervised learning, unsupervised learning, and representation learning. So that's all for my presentation. Thank you so much for listening. So I also refer to the paper for the technical part and the detailed information. I also refer to the GitHub code for reproducibility. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your talk. So we have some time for question and answer. I don't know. So maybe you can raise your hand somehow, and then I can set that you can talk. Or you can just input your name to the Q&A. Then Yui-kun will be happy to answer your question.
Yeah.
Or maybe even at the end of the all the talks, we have some time for question and answer. So you can ask any question at any time for any talk. So please, so let us now go ahead to our third talk by Inatsu-san. So Yui-kun, thank you so much.
Yeah,
so could you switch to Inatsu-san now?
Okay, so I will stop.
Yeah, I have, sorry, one question from Tasaka-san. Yui-kun, could you read out the question and then answer?
But sorry, but I cannot see the question.
Okay. Okay, let me read the question. So she is
okay. I see.
Okay.
So your question is that about the lasso paper, the lasso paper, and the idea is interesting, but the question is that why the response vector y is parameterized by z in linear. So actually it's okay because in the for the technical parts, we also conditioning on the orthogonal, we also consider the orthogonal projection of the data y on the dimension eta of interest. So that's why we can focus on the line. So even you use the polyhedral at the seminal paper, but finally you also have restrict the data to the line because you are focusing on the dimension of interest. So because we are focusing on the dimension of the interest and we conditioning on the orthogonal projection of the vector y on the eta. So which means that we can, it is completely fine for restricting the data to the line. Yeah, so that's my answer.
So I said Tamura-san can talk. So if you have a question, you can ask now. Is it fine? Okay, so now let's move on to Inatsu-san's talk. Thank you so much for your question. And anytime, please ask a question. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm Yui Natsu of Nagoya Institute of Technology. Today, I talk about Bayesian experimental design for optimizing black box functions and uncertainty. First, we explain black box function. It is a function in which the relation between input and output is not expressed as an explicit function. Moreover, observing the output corresponding to each input is assumed to be expensive in black box function. For example, hyperparameter tuning for deep learning is an example. Maximizing the black box function is an important task. In the previous example, it corresponds to determining the parameters with best predictive performance. However, since evaluation of black box function is expensive, we want to find the optimal solution without evaluating all the inputs. Bayesian experimental design is a technique for black box function optimization that can be expected to find the optimal solution efficiently by repeating these steps. First, we built Bayesian predictive model from training data. Second, we select the next evaluation point using predicted model. Third, we observe selected point and add it to the training data. After that, using update data set, we repeat these steps. In Bayesian experimental design, it is important to build a predictive model and how to select the next evaluation point. As a predictive model, Bayesian linear model and Gaussian process regression model are often used. The next evaluation point is usually selected to the point that maximizes the evaluation function called the acquisition function. For example, these acquisition functions are often used. In particular, UCB is closely related to the content of today's talk. So this is the example of GP prediction using UCB. This red curve is true function, and this black curve is GP posterior mean. Also, this black point is observed value, and this blue dashed line is the UCB maximum point. So this blue point is the next observation. After observation, the predicted model is updated. By repeating this process, we can see that the optimal solution search is efficiently performed. So far, we have talked under the assumption that all inputs are controllable. However, in practical applications, the inputs often have two types of variables. The first is a design variable that the user can completely control. The second is an environmental variable, which is a random variable that the user cannot control. For example, growing condition optimization is an example. We can control these variables. On the other hand, we cannot control these variables depend on environment. In such cases, it is important to find the optimal design variable efficiently. Then the natural question is, what is the optimal design variable in this setting? To answer this question, it is necessary to quantify the goodness of the design variables. These are commonly used goodness measures for the design variable. Stochastic robustness measure is the expectation with respect to the environmental variable. Probability threshold robustness measure is the probability where black box function f exceeds a given threshold h, and variance measure is the square root of the variance of f. In growing condition optimization, if we are interested in the average harvest, it is natural to consider SR measure. If we are interested in the probability where the harvest exceeds a desired amount H, then PTR should be used. Also, if we want to choose a design variable where variance due to the randomness of the environmental variables is small, VAR should be used. Where we have talked about design variables and environmental variables, but in more detail, there are two types of environmental variables. In uncontrollable setting, W cannot be controlled. On the other hand, in simulator-based setting, W can be controlled. For example, if we actually grow a crop in the growing condition optimization, then this is an uncontrollable setting because we cannot control weather. On the other hand, when considering an expansion to evaluate simulator function that simulates the relation between growing conditions and harvest, then this is the simulator-based setting because it is possible to input any W into the simulator even if W is random. There are previous studies on SR maximization in uncontrollable setting and simulator-based setting. On the other hand, there are no studies on maximizing PTR and variance. Hence, we propose Bayesian experimental design for PTR and variance in these two settings. In this talk, due to the time limitation, we only introduce PTR optimization in simulator-based setting and variance optimization in uncontrollable setting. Before that, we will explain the concept of GP, the concept of Gaussian process regression and UCB, which are the basis of our research. We explain them in terms of maximization of black box function f without environmental variables. We assume a Gaussian process as a prior distribution for f. Here, GP is like a normal distribution extended to infinite dimensions. As a property of GP, the posterior distribution of f after adding new data also follows GP. And the posterior mean and posterior variance are given by like this. Hence, by using them, we can construct a credible interval for x like this. The UCB acquisition function is defined as the upper bound of the credible interval. Therefore, in the UCB-based experimental design, the next evaluation point is selected by this formula. As we can see, UCB-based strategy performs well. We will also introduce Bayesian experimental design for SR, which is another basis of our research. In previous study, they assume GP as a prior distribution for f. Moreover, from GP properties, if small f follows GP, its integral SRx also follows GP. In addition, its posterior mean and posterior variance can be calculated analytically. Therefore, the next selected point of the design variable, this one, is given by maximizing this UCB. So the next point, xt plus 1 was selected. But if we can also control W, how do we select next W? Previous studies suggest selecting the point where the highest posterior variance of the integrand in SR x plus 1. That is, the WT plus 1 is given by this formula. This is the illustration of Bayesian experimental design for SR. First, this UCB maximization point will be the next design variable to be evaluated. Next, when fixed this point, the posterior variance for F is given by like this, and the maximum posterior variance is this point. Hence, the point 0, 1 is next observation. After observation, predicted model is updated, and using the same procedure, the next evaluation point 1, 1 is decided. By repeating this process, we can see that the difference between the true maximum value and the predicted maximum value is efficiently reduced. Okay, now we introduce our research. First paper is this one, and the detail is given in archive. In this paper, our target function is this PTR function in the simulator-based setting. The flow proposed method is like this. Assuming GP as the prior distribution for F is the same of previous studies. UCB for PTR is naturally derived when credible intervals are properly constructed. And the posterior variance of this integrand can be calculated analytically because this indicator function follows Bernoulli distribution. However, constructing credible interval for PTR is difficult because PTR does not follow GP, even if small f follows GP. Therefore, our challenge is how do we build a proper credible interval for PTR? In order to solve this problem, we propose Chebyshev's inequality-based credible interval. Certainly, PTR does not follow GP. However, from GP properties, its posterior mean and posterior variance can be calculated or bounded by like this. By using this, applying Chebyshev's inequality, we propose valid credible interval. This is Chebyshev's inequality for PTR. That is, for any positive number tau t, this probability can be bounded by like this, and this variance is the posterior variance of PTR, and posterior variance is bounded by gamma square. Thus, for any probability delta, this credible interval, which is defined by setting tau t like this, satisfies this inequality. Hence, this is one of valid credible intervals. Using the upper bound of this credible interval, we select the next evaluation point, xt plus 1 of design variable in this way. On the other hand, since the indicator function follows Bernoulli distribution, the posterior variance is given by like this. Thus, Wt plus 1 is given by this formula. So these figures show experimental results for two benchmark functions. As we can see, our proposed method has high performance compared with other existing methods in both cases. Here, the performance was evaluated by using the difference between the true maximum value and predicted maximum value. Okay, so we introduce next study. The next paper is this one, and the detail is given in archive. In this paper, our target function is this mean variance function in the uncontrollable setting. From the definition, when alpha is 1, this is the same as SR. Similarly, if alpha is 0, then this is VAR. So this formulation includes both SR and VAR settings. This is the conceptual diagram when alpha is 0.5. Our purpose is to find this red star efficiently. The flow of the proposed method is like this. Assuming GP as the prior distribution for F is the same of previous studies and PTR setting, and UCB for MV is naturally derived when credible intervals are properly constructed. Moreover, we don't have to consider about how to select next W, because W is generated randomly in the uncontrollable setting. On the other hand, similarly to the PTR setting, constructing credible interval for MV is difficult because MV does not follow GP, even if F follows GP. In order to solve this problem, first, we derive UCBs for SR and VAR. After that, we construct the UCB for MV like this. Where we first explain how to construct UCB for SR. We can construct the credible interval of F because F follows GP. Therefore, since SR is defined as like this, and F is included in this credible interval with high probability, then taking integral, this inequality holds with high probability. Hence, hence the interval from this lower integral to this upper integral is one of credible intervals for SR. So we defined this integral as UCB for SR. Next, we explain how to construct a UCB for VAR. So we use a credible interval of SR we just built. By using credible intervals of small f and SR, we have this inequality. Then, by considering the square of this, we get this inequality, where L tilde and U tilde are the function of curve and spread. Hence, for both sides, by taking integral and the square root and -1, then we get this inequality. Therefore, we defined this upper bound as UCB for VAR. These figures show experimental results for two benchmark functions, two GP test function settings, and two real data sets. As we can see, our proposed method has high performance compared with other existing methods in all cases. Here, the performance was evaluated by using the same indicator as in the PTR. Well, this is today's summary. We focused on Bayesian experimental design, which is a powerful tool for optimizing black box function. We introduced Bayesian experimental design under uncertainty. The optimal design variable can be found efficiently by properly constructing the credible intervals of the target function. We explained methods of constructing credible intervals in PTR and mean variance settings, which are based on Chebyshev's inequality and the credible interval of small f. This is a reference. That's all for my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Inat-san. We don't see any question in Q&A. So let us move on to the next presentation by Eugene. So Eugene, could you prepare your slides? By the way, at any time for any talk, you can ask questions to Q&A. Also, you can just put your name if you have a question. Then I can turn on your microphone.
So I'm Eugene, and I'm doing a postdoc with and I will talk about screening rules. So I'll first explain what it is. It's about variable selection. So this slide will almost summarize what I will talk about in this presentation. Usually we have some input data and we learn an algorithm from it and get an output like a prediction or something in a structured way. In this era where we have a lot of data, when we collect them, like the big data era, it's important to select the most important information from that data, right? And the goal of a screening rule is that given some particular structure that we want in the output, we want to remove like unnecessary information from the input data without affecting the output. So to give a real world example is to look at my face right now in this Zoom session. You can see that I don't use the same background than my other colleagues because I was completely transparent in that background. So actually the input data is what is recorded by my camera and the output is what you get. In between, there is a variable selection algorithm provided by Zoom that will remove the background and just show up my face. As you can see, it removes too much information, meaning that the variable selection that we use right now is not safe. And I can guarantee you that I'm not transparent, okay? So just to clarify the setting. So in this talk, I will show one techniques to use some variable selection so that we can remove some variable by providing a mathematical guarantee that we are not removing important informations. So this is one example on climate studies where we have some, imagine this world map where in each grid cells, we are recording these information like air temperature, like the precipitable water, the pressure, so on, and we collect them into a design matrix X. And the goal here is like given some target region, so let's say Nagoya, we want to predict the temperature of Nagoya by using the temperature that we have observed in other part of the region, right? So these are our main tasks. So one way to do this is just to assume that the temperature can be represented as a linear combination of the air temperature, the pressure, the wind speed, and so on. And the goal will be now to calibrate like which way do we put on the temperature and the pressure and so on. To do this, we can use a classical way to train our model and to check if it's predict well or not. It's just a cross-validation stuff. So what you can do is to select the coefficient of our linear combination by least square restricted on the training data. And then we use the solution that we get to see what is the output. Are we able to predict well on the data that we have not seen yet, like the test? So if we do this, we can observe an error, like a test error around 13, let's say. Just keep it as a number, one number. Then there is another strategy that we'll try to use the structure that we know from our experience. We can say that, at least from climate expert, that if we want to predict a temperature in some zone, maybe the faraway information, like if I want to predict the temperature in Tokyo, maybe the information that will come from Senegal, like temperature in Senegal does not matter, let's say. So I would like to put a weight of 0 for the temperature that come from Senegal, if I want to predict the temperature in Tokyo. So by using this kind of information, we can say that we have a group structure, like each group will select some a measurement on that target, on that region, and we would like to eliminate the regions that are far away from our region. So by using this kind of structure, this kind of knowledge that we have from climate expert, we can add some regularization on the least square that will penalize the faraway region, okay? So by doing so and using a training and testing process, so we can reduce the training error. We can reduce the testing error that we have before from 13 to 2. So this is a kind of technique that we use often in statistics, like by using some regularization, we can improve the prediction model. So here in this talk, we will see how to exploit this information, like the fact that some regions are useless or not, to accelerate the computational time to get this particular solution that we want. So here is one picture to have in mind, where we have some ground truth model, let's say beta star. If I have beta star, I can predict exactly the temperature, but beta star is not known. That's what we want to learn. One way to remove some variable is to use the Sparse linear regression, or lasso, which is quite famous now. If I plot the solution, this is what it looks like. So this is my true signal that I want to recover, and some of the coefficient is equal to 0. If I use the least square, so there is no regularization. You can think about it as lambda equal to 0 in the lasso. So you can see that I can predict, I can estimate beta star, but most of the coefficients are non-zero. So I don't have any structure here. I don't learn any structure here. While if I use like sparse penalties, I can, in some sense, get not only the coefficient that I want to estimate, but also I can estimate the non-zero structure here. And strict screening rule is exactly this. So if I want to estimate this structure, which is the set of non-zero, I need the solution. And screening rule, what is its goal is to try to estimate the set of non-zero before solving the optimization problem. This is a case of regression, but it's happened also in classification. This is one image of data point that have a two class, the blue and the red one. and we want to find a way to separate these two classes. So one way to do it is SVM. So if we train the SVM with all data, we will get this solution, like with this margin. And the goal of scaling rule is to remove some data point so that we will get exactly the same solution. So if I train my SVM with only this data, I will get the exact same solution than training the SVM with all this data. So the goal here is twofold. So one is to gain computational time, and second, to save memory, because all these extra data are not needed. How to do this precisely? So what is the mathematics behind this technique? So if you look at the lasso problem, so it is a convex optimization problem, I can check the optimality condition, which say that basically the gradient of the objective is equal to 0. Here it's a non-smooth problem, so it will be like 0 belong to the subgradient of the objective function at the optimal solution. So if I write the optimality condition, I will get this condition here, like this central equation. And we can see that the subdifferential of the L1 norm is divided in two parts. So something happens in 0 and at non-zero point. Okay, so if I exploit this, it tells me that anytime coordinate G of the optimal solution is equal to 0, a sufficient condition to get that is to get this, the absolute value of the correlation between my feature xj and my dual variable theta is strictly smaller than 1. So here I have a test, I have a condition that I can test to check if the coordinates j is equal to 0 or not. If it's equal to 0, I can remove the G's coordinate safely. Like there will be no loss in my optimal solution beta hat. I will exactly recover it. But here one problem is that theta hat is not known. Like the formula here, you can see that theta hat depends on the exact solution that I don't know. And so here the techniques is just to find like one set that will contain the exact optimal dual solutions. So this can be done. I will show later how to do it. And then if I just maximize absolute correlation between my feature xj and theta, I can compute this test like explicitly without knowing any optimal solution. So if this maximum absolute correlation is strictly smaller than 1, it means that my optimal test holds and that I can remove the variable safely. So safely here means I don't make any false exclusion. So if I take it as this example of my face that you can see, there will be no transparent place on my face. Like you will see my face fully if you apply a safe techniques to detect my face on Zoom. So these techniques have been used a lot, like recently in optimization, like for lasso and for group lasso and sorted L1 norm for classification problem, for metric learning problem, for easing model and non-negativity constraint. And anytime if you write the paper on scaling rules, you have to take up your objective function, like your loss function, your regularization that you use, and derive the scaling rule by hand. So anytime you can imagine a new loss function or regularization, you have to do the job again. And that's what we want to avoid here. So can we, in this type of settings where we have a data fitting term plus some complexity, like a sparse regularization, can we have a unified way to say what scaling rule is? Okay, so we don't need to check up exactly what is the algebraic form of these functions. So we have a unified point of view on scaling rules and extend it as much as we can. So this is one goal. Second goal is if we try to identify this optimal structure, like the optimal sparsity that we have at the end of the day, how many iterations it will take to identify it. So this number of iterations will be the complexity to identify the optimal active set. And we want to have a bound, an explicit bound on it. So, so if I take, so in my setting, so far, the most general result that we have is this type of setting where we have a loss function here, f of x beta, plus some separable regularization. So here, the group structure here is separable, okay? So you have a sum of some function restricted to one group, and the group does not overlap, okay? And I will also assume that the loss function is convex as well as the regularization. So this is a big restriction height, but at least it's large enough to encompass all the example I gave before. And the goal is, can we get a single screening formula for all these class of functions? The answer is yes. So we need two things. We need the optimality condition. And if you remember, to derive the screening rules for the lasso, we need to check the subdifferential and see on which part it's equal to, on which part the optimal solution is equal to 0 or not. So we need a particular property on the subdifferential of the regularization so that we can derive the screening rule. So optimality condition alone is not enough. Of course, if I take a smooth problem, you look at the optimality condition, there is no screening rule over there. There's a particular structure on the subdifferential that we need to understand to get the screening rule, a general formula for it. So here we go. This is the optimality condition, so there's nothing new here. And if my function is smooth, it's just 0 is equal to the gradient at the optimal solution. And decompose it that way in the case of non-smooth problem. Now the goal will be to test if my optimal solution beta hat at some group is equal to some quantity, let's say beta star j. Beta star j can be equal to 0 or not. It's just the optimal structure that I want, which is known already. So beta star is known, and I want to test if at my optimal solution at that group, it will be equal to beta star or not. If it's equal to beta star, then I can just set it straight and remove that part of the data. So now what particular property do we need on the regularization? So here is this lemma that we can get is if you take a convex, like we don't need convexity here. Take any point z and a proper convex and a proper functions, and we look at the interior of the subdifferential at that point. We assume that it is not empty. So basically, it will say that this function p is non-smooth at z, but saying that the interior is non-empty is stronger than just saying that it's non-smooth. But anyway, this is the condition that I need. And if I take any other point like z prime, so the subdifferential cannot overlap. So I don't know if this property is known already, but I find it quite surprising. Like if you take any function p and you look at the subdifferential, they will not overlap as soon as this condition is satisfied. Okay, and then what I can do, I can just test the subdifferential of my function at the optimal point and compare it to the subdifferential of omega at beta star. So here, if these two subdifferential have a common intersection, then automatically beta star must be equal to a beta hat, okay, at that particular group. So that's exactly what this lemma says. So here I know that the correlation between x and theta at the particular group is already on the subdifferential at my optimal point. So this is what I know from optimality condition. So now if I test if this same point is also in the interior of my subdifferential at beta star, it's exactly mean that the 2 points have a common intersection. And the lemma said automatically that beta star will be equal to beta hat. Then we have a common screening rules. So if this test hold, if xj dot theta hat is included in the interior of omega j at beta star, automatically I can set beta hat equal to beta star. And this hold for general convex function f and a general regularization omega j. So we don't need to check the formula of f or j to get these general screening rules. So the second point is that, okay, so theta hat is unknown, right? So I need to compute a set that will contain it so that my screening rule will be safe. So if I get this R, I can just test this inclusion and the same happen again and again. Compute this set, so there was a line of work that built a set. So let's say in this image here, this is my constraint set. This is a space where all my variable lives. And I have the optimal solution here, theta, let's say, the boundary of my set. So given any feasible point theta, I will build a ball whose radius is proportional to the optimization error. The optimization error here will be measured by the duality gap. We can say that it's proportional to the optimization error that I have during my iteration process of my algorithm. So the interesting point with this type of safe region is that the more I get close to the optimal solution, the more I shrink my ball, the more I shrink my safe region, so that this test will be more and more efficient. So at the end of the day, this ball will be small, like if I iterate. And then we can say something. So what's happened here is if I want to identify the active structure, one result is that we need a finite number of iterations, A0. So the literature, this type of result have been studied before. If you use a proximal gradient descent algorithm or coordinate descent algorithm to solve lots of problem, we can say that after a finite number of iterations, we can iterate, we can identify the active set without any screening rules. Okay? But to get this analysis, we need to check each algorithm. We need to check proximal gradient descent explicitly, coordinate descent explicitly, prox Newton explicitly. So it depends on any of each particular algorithm. So here what we show is that we can derive an algorithmic independent complexity. So what does it mean? It means that if you take any algorithm that have this rate of convergence, so you can have other rates. So here I just control a linear rate of convergence just for simplicity. You can check my latest paper to get more detail on it. But take any algorithm that have a linear rate of convergence, we can find an upper bound on the complexity. So after this number of iterations, we will exactly identify the optimal active set. Here, the constant in my bound depend only on the problem. It depends on the norm of my design matrix. Norm depend on the smoothness constant that I have in my function and other parameter, but all of them depend only on the problem that we have. And the bound is explicit. There is no universal constant or anything. And here, this result hold for any algorithm as soon as we get the rates. It depends only on the rate of convergence, not of the iterate and not on the iterate itself. So it kind of unify other type of result on active set identification without relying on a specific algorithm. Okay, to finish, I'll just show some example on the benefits of screening rules. On my previous example, the initial example I gave was about predicting a climate, like predicting a temperature by using some climate data and adding some regularization that will cancel some information from the faraway region. Here, if I use a coordinate descent to solve the problem, I will get this time. So this is a percentage in black, let's say. So these are also competitive methods. And if you use like the screening rules that I show with the finite number of iterations that we bound using duality gap and so on, we can save almost 80% of the computational time. So I don't have a benchmark to show the quantity of memory that we can save, but at least the computational time is quite explicit to highlight the benefits of these methods. So, well, there are some future challenges on this. So if you go on Google Scholar and you tap screening rules, you will have a bunch of paper coming in. So there are still work on this. And one particular thing that I want to do is this unified point of view is still limited by convexity assumptions and the separability of the regularization. So how can we go beyond this? It's still an open question. So if you love doing like convex analysis stuff, you can anytime send me email. I will be happy to talk and try to figure out how to get around these problems. So that's all. If you have any question, then let me know.
Thank you so much, Eugene. I do not see a question in Q&A box. Maybe it's difficult to pose a question in a short time. So you can ask a question at any time later. And safe screening is a very important technique. By using safe screening, you can say something about the solution without actually solving the solution. This is very, very important. And the next talk is about the application of safe screening to extract some important information from structured data. So Hanada-san, could you please start your talk?
So let me start. So the title of my talk is Predictive Pattern Mining, Supervised Learning for Sets, Sequences, or the like. So my name is Hiroyuki Hanada at this team, a researcher at this team. So let me start my talk. So as an introduction, so we consider data structures, that we consider data structures having patterns, that is substructures. So here, the data structure we consider is sets, sequences, graphs, and so on. And given many instances of such a structure, we'd like to find characteristic patterns. For example, of a set ABC, there is this set is considered to contain patterns of A, B, C, AB, and so on. Similarly, we can consider that the sequence ABCBC has a patterns A, B, C, AB, BC, CV, and so on. We can do the similar for the graphs. For example, this contains AB, ABD, AC, and so on. So this is a definition of patterns. And in addition, additionally, we'd like to consider the pattern mining. So given such instances, for example, multiple sequences, multiple sets, and so on, we'd like to find patterns satisfying certain conditions. So we have a data set like this. In this case, we consider the set of sequences. So for pattern mining, there are several setups, and the famous one is the frequent pattern mining. That is, given such instances, we'd like to find all patterns that certain number of instances have. For example, given 3 sequences, we'd like to find patterns that 2 or more instances have. In this case, for example, A is included in all of the sequences, and C is included in 2 of the sequences. So we'd like to find such patterns satisfying this condition. So here I'd like to go to our setup. So in this frequent pattern mining setup employs only the instances of such data structure. In this case, only sequences. So on the other hand, the setup we mainly consider is that we suppose that each instance has an outcome. For example, sequence ABC has the outcome positive, sequence AAB has the outcome negative, and so on. So this corresponds to unsupervised or supervised setting in the machine learning literature. So in this case, this corresponds to the supervised setup. So our team studies machine learning methods that can predict the outcome from the patterns in the structures, like sets and sequences. So which is often referred to as the predictive pattern mining. For example of this case, we'd like to find that, for example, pattern BC is likely to contained in the positive cases, outcome +1 cases. So this is the overview. And let me go to the example in the previously published paper in our by our team. In this study, we used such a technique to analyzing animals' behavior. For example, we learned a predictor that can predict whether the animal is male or female. So in this case, in this paper, we in reality applied this such a situation of the data for the male bird and female birds. So with this method, we can conjecture that extracted patterns are behaviors specific to either male or female. So this helps research of understanding animal behaviors. To do this, after recording behaviors of animals, we convert them into sequences, and then we run a predictor that predict whether the animal is male or female. So this is an overview of the pattern mining and predictive pattern mining. So this is the overview, and then let me go to the technical points. First, I'd like to explain the basic concept, and then we go to the specific problem setup our team uses. First, as a basic concept of pattern mining, let me introduce the concept of pruning. The difficult point of the pattern mining is that number of patterns grows exponentially against the size of the pattern. For example of sequence mining, the pattern of length 1, there are only three patterns of length 1 if we have 3 characters. But for length 2, the number of possible patterns are increased to 9. Of course, the length 3, the number of patterns is 27. So this grows exponentially. So practically, we'd like to avoid it by enumerating only patterns that can satisfy desired condition. So please remember that the previous example of finding patterns that 2 or more instances had. So assume that we enumerate patterns small to large. So first we check for 3 patterns and check whether they included by 2 or more instances. Then we go to we extend these patterns into larger. Then, for example, we extended like this. Then the important point is that these patterns are not included in 2 or more instances. So we stop extending these patterns and only extending these patterns. In this sense, so we call such a strategy pruning, since a part of tree is eliminated from the searching. So this pruning strategy condition is simple for the frequent pattern mining of finding patterns that certain number of instances have. So this is simple because we have only to stop the extension when the number of instances becomes smaller than the threshold. But important point is to derive pruning conditions for predictive pattern mining setups we stated before as this. So in order to explain this pruning setup, how we consider the pruning, let me go to the details of the predictive pattern mining method we mainly use. So let me introduce the method of SPP, safe pattern pruning, as a method of predictive pattern mining our team developed. So SPP considers the linear prediction function. So because of the linear prediction function, this can be used for the regressions or classifications or the like. And we consider the linear prediction function by all patterns. That is, the linear prediction function has the form of coefficient times the indicator variables of pattern inclusion for all patterns. So this is an example of the linear prediction function by patterns. So we can see that fx is 3.5 plus 2.1 times the indicator variable of pattern AB is included. So in this case, if AAAB becomes, this value becomes 1, and this value becomes 0. And this sequence, the outcome of this sequence is predicted as 5.6. For other sequences, we can do the similar. And we can, so we in reality applied this to the previously stated data of birds. We applying this SPP to this data set, we can see a result like this. For example, we can see that pattern of this has the coefficient plus 0.2. So in this setup, we set the label male +1 and female -1. So the positive coefficient is expected to the pattern specific to male. Similarly, this pattern is expected to specific to female. So for example, this pattern is the bird. If the bird flies with high speed and water temperature is middle and far from the coast, then this is likely to male. And in reality, because this is a linear prediction function, there are many patterns and coefficients. So we can see that these patterns having the high positive coefficient are expected to specific to male, and these are expected to be specific to female. And we can see these patterns, we can know that, for example, such a tendency of difference between male and female birds. For example, male birds are likely to keep flying long, while female birds alternate flying and stopping, and so on. So this is the overview of the formulation of SPP. And I'd like to next explain the technical details of SPP as an overview. So let me go to the techniques of SPP. Again, SPP considers that the prediction can be made with linear combination by all patterns. But there is a difficult point. First, the number of all patterns is huge, as stated. So we cannot explicitly enumerate all patterns, and even they can be enumerated because this is a very high dimensional data set, a very high dimensional model. So feature selection is desired. So to solve this, we introduced a sparse modeling by L1 regularization. This is treated by Eugene in the previous talk. So with the L1 regularization, we reduce the number of patterns in the trained model. So training with L1 regularization is formulated as follows. So this is a summation for all instances. And this is, if we use squared loss, then we can conduct the regression. And for binary classification, a famous example is to use the logistic regression loss. But not only this term, minimizing this term, we'd like to minimize the sum with this L1 norm. And it is known that with L1 norm, it enhances the coefficients to be 0. So as a result, the number of patterns in the trained model is reduced. So, and we often call this sparseness. So as a result of L1 regularization, even we model with all patterns, the resulted prediction function becomes sparse like this. That is, only a limited number of models are used in reality in the prediction function. So this works as a feature selection. And in addition, the SPP can reduce the computational cost by pruning. So the important point is that we developed from this L1 regularization, we converted into the pruning condition. So if you recall the talk by using, so we can apply the screening condition. That is, which pattern must have coefficient 0. So with this, we can reduce the number of patterns, but the problematic point is that we need to explicitly enumerate a huge number of patterns in order to apply the screening method. So only the conventional screening method is insufficient to reduce the computational cost. So the important point of SPP is that we check this pattern, and then if we can find that all of these patterns have the coefficient 0, then we can prune this pattern. So let me show an example. We check whether all descendants have 0 coefficient. If not, we have to continue. Then we continue. And if we can find the pattern that all coefficients have 0 coefficient, all descendants have 0 coefficient, then we conduct a pruning. That is, we don't extend the pattern anymore. And similarly, we repeat this like this. And the part of patterns are pruned. And we can see that the remained patterns are possibly have non-zero coefficients. So with this, we can reduce the computational cost. And in reality, as stated by Eugene, we need another solution to conduct this. So in reality, we often use lambda, changes of lambda, strengths of the regularization. So for example, if we know this solution, if we know a solution for this lambda, then we conduct the pruning for different lambda. And we continue for this, and we can compute the solutions efficiently. So this is a technical overview of SPP. So in summary, let me go to the summary. So we suppose a data set where each instance is consisting of an outcome and the sequence or set or graph like this. And we'd like to learn patterns that are useful to predict the outcome. So like this. So by SPP, we run the prediction model by all patterns. And the important technique is pruning that avoids the enumerating unnecessary patterns. So let me show, finally, let me talk about a further topic. SPP is a prediction model of linear function for all patterns. So, but not combining, rather than combining all patterns in a model, depending on applications, we instead use a method that evaluates the importance of each pattern one by one. So without using combination patterns. But so depending on applications, we can we choose either of strategy. So that's all for my talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hanada-san. Okay, we have one question.
Yes.
Okay. So
yeah,
could you read out the question and please try to answer?
Yes. I'm sorry. Yes. How much is the improvement of the calculation order by SPP compared to the conventional method? Yeah, thank you. Good question. So if we do this with a naive method, then this requires exponential cost. And in this method, in the worst case, we need exponential cost. But in reality, if we apply the data, it's very fast compared to the naive method, but to some extent, the exponential effect remains. For example, if we consider if we allow larger patterns, then the worst case cost increases exponentially. For example, so it's still difficult to apply to too large data set, but to some extent we can do in a realistic time.
Yeah, in any of algorithms for that kind of problem, the worst case computational order is still exponential. That's we cannot do anything for that. And compared with the other method, like there are several methods using boosting-like approach called iBoost or graph boost, etc. And those kind of methods needs to search down the tree every time each feature is added. On the other hand, our method does not conduct a tree search very, very often. That is the computational advantage. But in terms of the computational order, as Hanada-san said, the worst case is still exponential. So I hope that answers your question. So if you have any more clarification, you can send us email anytime. So thank you very much for a question. Okay, we have another question.
Yes, another question.
Please. Yeah.
Yes, another research aiming to prune the subtree, like using chi-square, which is not necessarily monotonic. Yes. So yes, in this case, it's difficult if the pruning condition is not monotonic. So we first develop that. For such method, monotonic pruning condition. Yeah, if monotonic condition is available, we try to implement. But if not, how do we? So we quit or approximate or and so on is needed to So in the case of SPP, we have derived the monotonic pruning condition. But of course, depending on the learning method or the like, this may not be monotonic.
Yes, so our idea is to combine self-screening and a pruning technique based on the divide and conquer algorithm. And the monotonicity is a very, very important key gradient. So we have to investigate the monotonicity for each method. But as in the previous work by Eugene, we'd like to somehow generalize our idea for what kind of problem this kind of monotonicity can be derived. So that kind of research would be very, very important. But for now, we have to develop somehow the monotonic relation in order to apply our algorithm. Thank you very much for question.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think there are no other questions. We are always welcome to have questions in email or any other methods. So I would like to say thank you for the listeners for staying with us for a long time. And I also like to thank to the speakers in our team. Thank you very much. Okay, so if there are no other questions, we'd like to close our seminar. But let me announce the seminar in the coming weeks. Each week we have a very interesting seminar. Next week we have a seminar of Tabei-san's team, Succinct Information Processing Unit. So if you are familiar with the last talk, like pattern mining, Tabei-san's unit also has somehow related research. So please join this seminar. And even after the end of this year, we have a consecutive seminar by each team. So please join. Okay, so thank you very much for joining us again. And yeah, have a nice evening. Thank you.